Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so glad you're here. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Is the weather impacting your mood, your motivation, your anxiety, maybe some depression? How are you feeling? I know the sun has been so good for me, just being outside in nature, taking in the warmer temperatures. It is good for the soul. It just changes your mood and motivation. So I'm grateful we've had some sunny days. That has helped so much, just really being present in the moment. How are you doing? Tag me on social if you want to share at Kristen D. Boyce. I want to tell you about this week's episode because we covered a lot of ground. I found him. I'm not sure if he found me. I'm not quite sure how it all came down, but Case Kenny is on Instagram. He does all these inspirational quotes. He'll also go around town posting these quotes. And he's been on the Today Show, Good Morning America. He's written a book called That's Bold of You. It's about mindfulness and it's a bestseller. He's launched a 60-day journal back in 2023, the Bold Journal. And he really has taken on kind of an inspirational, vulnerable, I would say he's embracing that and putting it out into the world. And so we talked a lot about words and how words impact how we feel and labels and how labels can impact kind of our inner critic and our inner thoughts and how we feel about ourselves. We talked about tools and a way to work through the inner critic to transform that into feeling better. So we really covered a lot of ground, and I thought it was really worthwhile to talk about his origin and how he got started. Well, I'll leave it as a surprise because it's an interesting origin on how he started his journey into this work. So if you're really struggling with kind of just self-talk, maybe shame, maybe not feeling good enough or worthy or defective, or you feel lost, you feel lonely, maybe disconnected, this episode is for you. And I have the free journal. If you want that to use that as a tool, I highly recommend it. You can get it for free at Kristen, KRISTEN, Boyce, BOICE.com/free resources. We also have it linked in the show notes. And I think in this episode, I invite you into doing some self-reflection. We talk about important questions or prompts, which begin with words, and how that can lead to self-discovery, healing, and a different inner dialogue. So without further ado, here is this week's episode. Hope you enjoy it. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am very excited about my guest today. You might have seen him on Instagram. He has a ton of amazing content that is really geared towards healing yourself and feeling more confident and mindfulness and kind of really discarding or closing the chapter on what doesn't serve you, maybe relationships, maybe how you talk to yourself. I mean, there's so many options here. And Case, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you put out so much good content. How did this all evolve? Like, how did you decide, you know what, this is what I'm going to focus on?
Well, certainly is a journey there. So, I'm 36, started doing this professionally when I was like 29. Never, ever had an aspiration to do this, frankly. And I started the podcast when I was 29, just kind of in response to my life. I just felt like I didn't have a strong point of view on myself, like what I actually wanted, how I actually felt. I felt like I was doing a lot of copying and pasting. So I started the podcast as a means to literally just be like, let me force myself through my own experiences and logic, prove that the things I want, the way I feel, whatever it is true to me. I'm not borrowing, I'm not chasing, I'm not doing all these things. Through the podcast, what I realized I was doing is I was practicing a very practical form of mindfulness, right? Challenging how I felt, finding the words to vocalize it, aligning my actions with those things, and then using that to kind of steer my life. And that's always been the motivation, and that simple. Like, I think there's I don't have an aspiration to be a licensed psychologist or therapist or anything like that. It's not my space. I am just really, really drawn to logical mindfulness. How can we make sense of our lives through a lens of honesty? And then most important, how can we find words to empower our internal dialogues? Like obviously if people follow me on Instagram, I'm known for words, short, snappy little quotes. And I do that for a reason because I've found that the power of mindfulness is learning how to speak to yourself. And I've just found the more that I've challenged myself to form a point of view, make sense of my life, update that frequently, allow myself to reinvent myself, and then find words that kind of encompass my worldview, things are better. Like there's less to regret. So really, I see my purpose in life of helping people feel seen and then finding words to help them vocalize that feeling. It all started with the podcast when I was 29.
That's amazing. I know we were talking before we started the podcast that you went to Notre Dame. And for all my Indiana listeners, which we have a huge listener base in Indiana, what did you study when you were in Notre Dame? And then how did you segue out of that into what you're doing now?
You'll never guess what I studied.
I'm dying. I'm like, what did you study?
I would put good money on the fact that no one would be able to guess what I studied.
Ooh, should I guess?
Yeah, go give it a guess. It'd be funny if you did guess. Yeah, give it a guess.
Ooh, this is going to be tough. I want to say something with math. I don't know why.
Well, I appreciate you thinking that I'm good at math, but that's probably the thing I'm worst at. No, I studied Chinese and Arabic.
Right. I would
languages.
Never have guessed that.
Because of the paleness, how pale I am. I am a tall, Midwestern, lanky dude. And, you wouldn't really see it coming. No, but I majored in Chinese and Arabic. I was a double major. I was always really good at languages. I was bad at math. Took accounting, was not good at it. I started off as pre-med because my brother's a cardiologist, was not good. Luckily, I had very supportive parents. And they're like, you should study what you're drawn to, what you're good at. In high school, I took 5 or 6 years of Latin. And I took APs and got all fives and was really good at Latin and languages and Spanish. It was let me invest in languages that I think have the most potential. So I chose Chinese for international business and then Arabic for government work implication. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. It was a small class. Granted, there weren't a whole lot of people taking it. And I worked in Shanghai for a little bit and, been to China a bunch. And it was really great. Never continued using it. Never used it full time. Eventually right out of school, I got a job in marketing and advertising in Chicago. And then eventually got into advertising sales, led a sales team for about 8 years. Really enjoyed studying languages. I think obviously languages are a window into the soul, and studying cultures and everything that comes along with it was really valuable. But yeah, it wasn't, no background in English or literature or therapy or psychology or anything like that. It started with Chinese.
That's fascinating. And when you study language, though, and cultures, it does segue into studying people. To your point, we all want to be seen. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel understood. We all want to feel important. These are universal truths, no matter what culture you're in.
So absolutely. So I'm sure there is an absolute tie-in. And I spent a lot of time thinking about words and sentence structure. And obviously now that's really all I do with my writing and everything. So it's funny looking back how the dots were certainly there to connect at the time. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing this because I feel drawn to it. But it's cool now how it kind of makes sense, frankly.
It does. That's a cool story. I haven't met anyone that studied Chinese or Arabic. You're the first.
Yeah, nice.
Been doing this for over 25 years. Here we are, and you're the first person.
Right.
That's pretty exciting. Okay, so when you started this work and you started to see people feel unworthy, people feel not worthy of a healthy relationship, they feel less than, they feel defective, they feel not good enough, they feel like there's something wrong with them. And we see all these images now on social media. And we say, well, look at them. They look amazing. And my life is in shambles, or I look ugly, or I'm not successful enough, or I'm not thin enough, or muscular enough. How do you think this is transitioning to our psyches?
As I'm sure you see in your work, it's having a one-to-one effect. I mean, you literally open your phone and then your next thought is that of negative comparison. And there's no need to read between the lines. You can see exactly where it came from. Comparison is a heck of a drug. I mean, I think all these things that you work on in your practice that require your expertise, they're learned behaviors. We're not just waking up one day and feeling inadequate. There are catalysts for these things. And I think certainly in this day and age, a lot of it is social media. I think a lot of it is also just, not to bring it back to the thing I'm passionate about, but it's the words we use. the labels we use. Like when we feel unlovable or unworthy or too XYZ appearance, whatever it may be, like the words we're using, we've heard them before. They're likely remnants of something maybe someone else said to us that we allowed to become representative of who we think we are, or in our own internal dialogues, we've selected these words and they've become reflections of who we think we are. Like words are really important. That's like, I wrote this book, That's Bold of You, basically on the idea of labels. Just the words we use to describe ourselves construct our identities. I'm sure you wouldn't disagree with that. And then we find evidence to support that, and it just becomes more and more ingrained and more difficult to escape. I called the book That's Bold of You because I think it's a really, really bold thing to be able to scroll on Instagram and be like, well, that's cool that that person is really hot or successful or whatever. Like, cool, that's nice. But to not take it any further, and certainly to not see your lack of something as a sign of your identity. I love social media. I think it's fantastic. I'm never that person to like bemoan social media and say it's ruined everything. I certainly think, though, it's created a lot of challenges. And I think 10 years from now, we're going to look back and see generations of people who have tendencies and anxieties that are 100% connected to social media. But I think it takes a strong person to be able to be inspired by other people's actions and presence and circumstances instead of to be drained by it. And I think that's a choice. I certainly encourage people. One of my big practices is that of journaling, to be able to find words to describe your thoughts and your feelings in the face of comparison, and to break it down and to not let your natural humanness take over. I think a lot of the time, the thing that I'm really hot on is like, we think about mindfulness, for instance, as a practice, and it means many different things to many people. I think for the most part, we agree, mindfulness is about being present. It's about being honest with yourself. It's about being open to your feelings and receiving them. And so you talk to a lot of people and it's all about, don't do anything, just be present, just feel, just like, how does that make you feel? Like, describe it. How does it make you feel? And I think that's, of course, an essential first step in any wellness habit you might have. I think we also forget, and this is why my work is all around the written word, is that the second half of mindfulness is learning to talk to yourself. Like, mindfulness is learning to listen to yourself, but it's also learning to talk to yourself. I'm sure you'd agree that if you were only to listen to yourself, there's a lot of garbage up there that is not true, that is not you, right? There's a whole side of research in Michael Singer around how we're receiving our thoughts. They're not necessarily our thoughts. And if we only sit there and marinate and ruminate on these feelings, for instance, one of which might be scrolling and feeling unlovable or unattractive or whatever, if we only listen to that dialogue and accept it as truth, we're setting ourselves up for some serious label issues. So I think the other half is learning, how can we listen? How can we embrace what is true and needs work and what is not? And then most importantly, how can we find words to verbalize that and learn to talk back to ourselves in a compassionate way that certainly challenges ourselves, but doesn't allow us to fall victim to some of these thoughts that aren't true to us. So when I think about mindfulness, I really do think about it as a two-part equation, listening to yourself and talking to yourself. And without the latter, it's easy to potentially get lost in all that chatter, which rhymes and is great. But yeah, that's how I think about it.
Okay, let's talk about journaling. I'm a therapist. I love journaling. I'm a big research supports that people that do journal find they heal faster. They're more insightful. They have more self-awareness. They have more clarity. They have more compassion. They have more connection to themselves and others. I mean, I could go on and on. Lots of people are like, it doesn't do anything for me. I don't have time for that. That doesn't resonate with me. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about, how did you start? People are like, I don't even know what to write about. And I'm like, just stream of consciousness. There's something inside that feels there's a little bit of a defense against. So let's talk about it.
And I get that, frankly. There's many different types of journaling, to your point. I think for the wrong person, the wrong type of journaling will turn them off from it. So it's important that you try different types, certainly. For me, stream of consciousness will not work. I'm too ADD. I need some guardrails. If I just try to sit down and talk about how I feel, I will become the person you just described. Not for me. No, not for me. So I think it's important that you try different types, whether it's a bullet journal or productivity journal or goal, whatever, like find a way to test. But at the end of the day, I really do think like the output of your journaling is only as strong as the input, which would be the question that you're asking. So like for me, like I lead a lot of guided mindfulness and journaling sessions. Like to me, it's all about just coming up with really powerful questions. I think there's great journaling. That's just kind of baseline journaling, checking in with yourself, some basics, maybe some gratitude journaling. That's great. I have found, however, that a lot of it just becomes what I just call performative journaling. I'm grateful for my health. I'm grateful for another day. Like, I don't think it's ever bad to be grateful for those things, but that's not real. that is here and not here. That's in your head and not your heart. That is not going to give you a great benefit. I really do think you have to ask yourself hard questions that really challenge yourself, that you sit there and you're like, wow, that really opens something up. I think about journaling. I think the benefit of journaling, we can go on and on. I think it's about the word contrast. Like, I think a good journaling practice unearths contrast in your life. Contrast, the definition being the difference between what you assume and what is true, what you've been told and what you believe, your past and your present, like these things. It unearths pieces of contrast. What you have, what you want, how you feel, how you deserve to feel, lifestyle choices around anxieties, things like that. It unearths contrast and enables you to examine it. And asking yourself the right questions, you're not going to get that. It just becomes this performative thing. It just becomes this ho-hum wellness lifestyle, do your ice bath, drink your athletic greens and call it a day. No disrespect to all that. It just becomes a thing. I think the purpose should be that of to look at it and be like, wow, like that was really challenging. It's not an everyday practice in that sense, but I think we need to ask ourselves harder questions. And there's many journals, like I've written many other people have written. I think people should find the right journal that makes sense for them and be in the right headspace for it. Like you have to experiment with these things. Like if I were just to sit down and just try to write, it probably wouldn't work for me. Like I'm very motivated headspace wise by music. Like it gets me in a vulnerable headspace where actually I can feel the words kind of come out. Time of day matters too. So like these little variables that we might see them as non-factors, but really they are kind of guiding our conclusion about whether journaling is right for me or not. I think those are the things we need to test. And then at the end of the day, it's like, as a man and the guy, identifies by masculine attributes, like I'm big on, I want to remind myself that I'm powerful, that I'm in charge of my life. Journaling should do that. The idea with mindfulness and journaling is that if you're not on a pretty frequent timeline challenging your beliefs and your assumptions about life, it's more than likely that you're just borrowing other people's, right? If you're not, like, I'm a completely different guy at 36 than I was at 30 and 25 and 20 and even every year in that fact. If I'm not checking in with myself and my beliefs, I'm likely living other people's. That doesn't sit well with me. Journaling allows for you, and any therapy practice, I suppose, but journaling in particular allows for you to check in with yourself and say, I'm driving this ship. And then lastly, I would say just writing in general. Writing in general allows for you to kind of freeze time almost. To take something that's really complicated, that's taking up a lot of your mind space, you put it down on paper. Okay, now we're frozen. Like we got it out of here, now we got it here. Now, as metaphor goes, like now you've freed up your mind to like truly marinate on it and other things. It like frees up space. And I'm sure obviously there's a lot of neuroscience and thoughts around neuroplasticity and things like that. It's not my space, but there's a fair amount of science around mind and body and writing these things down. But all in, at the end of the day, after the ramble, I think it really is the power of the questions that you ask yourself.
Okay, let's talk about your top 3 most powerful questions. Like if someone's like, I don't know what question to ask myself. I don't know where to even begin. I know you can buy journals in your journal.
Yeah.
But where would somebody, if they're listening, says, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to give this a whirl.
Well, a lot of my journaling practice is around, this is specific, but around turning adjectives into verbs. We sit down, we're like, well, I want to be happy, right? So I'm going to journal because I want to be a happier person, or I want to be successful, or I want to be confident, right? We have these internal motivations and we're like, I'm going to do this thing. My journaling practice is around, okay, well, how can we turn an adjective, something that we're chasing, into a verb, into a lifestyle, and into verbs that we can then turn around and turn into choices. So like on the happy front, I want to be happy. I've got all kinds of issues with that as a goal to set for yourself. I think you're setting yourself up, right?
Too. I want to boycott that. Because happiness comes and goes like any other emotion. It's so much deeper than
Slippery slope. I would not recommend it. There's many other great ways to vocalize. But the journal would be, for instance, like one of my favorite prompts that I encourage people to answer is like fill in the blank of I'm the kind of person who, and then you fill that in with verbs that would support that notion of happiness. Like we're breaking down happiness into choices that you make, things that can't be taken from you, or success or confidence. Like how can we turn feelings into choices that can't be taken from us, and choices that we could actually point to, evidence. Like I think happiness, gratitude, confidence, success, it's always built on evidence, likely evidence that we've created for ourselves, but we get lost in the sauce of life where we forget what that looks like on the gratitude front, on the success front, on the confidence front as well. A lot of my journaling practice is around verbing and evidence seeking, like a lawyer almost. Like it's like, here's the evidence and here's the verdict. but we need to point at it and write about it as opposed to just kind of try to come up with it. So I'm the kind of person who is a prompt that I like to turn to very early. Like, we're setting goals for myself. What is your goal this year? To be happy. Okay, well, I'm the kind of person who, what are the things? And then there's more prompts that kind of support that bottom up, but a lot of it's around action and evidence.
Okay. So people look for evidence, but they look externally, and it creates more of like a performative. So they want to perform more, they want to achieve more, they want to earn more, and then that will give them the validation that they're successful or that they're confident or that if this person likes me or loves me or chooses me. Then how do you navigate that?
Well, I think that's the ultimate question, right? Like, how can we draw a line between what we're truly doing for ourselves and what we're doing for others? I would recommend therapy for that. That's a tough one. But I mean, one of the prompts that I do encourage people to do is this idea of life. I call it living in the gray, where it's just that. It's kind of ambiguous. You're doing a lot of borrowing. You're doing a lot of validation. You're not a bad person by any means. You're kind of in that middle. You haven't found yourself. That I try to encourage people to do, not necessarily to find truth, but to just show the difference in lifestyle choices of when you're looking at yourself or you're looking at yourself through the eyes of other people. So there's a quote that's always been around about how your life feels to you versus how it looks to other people, right? Which is kind of the idea of validation for other people or true heartfelt connection with yourself. So the prompt that I actually led this past weekend for a session was, all right, I want you just to come up with like the most contrasting examples of how you would live your life if you only lived it for how it looked to other people versus how you live your life if you only lived it for how it felt to you. Just come up with examples of those behaviors and those choices that you would make to try to prove to yourself what it looks like. And I just find that the more evidence we can create around that, the more examples we can create. If I only lived my life through the eyes of other people or how it looked to other people, I would blank. And we fill in those, again, with verbs, with lifestyle choices. If I lived for how I felt about my life, how it felt to me, I would blank. Just draw a line between those two, show that there is a line between the two. I find that that's an effective way. But yeah, ultimately, I think what you're describing is potentially a bit of a lifelong pursuit of identifying the difference, but just stuff like that. I mean, just finding examples like, oh, an example can be a real catalyst. And of course, then writing it down, I think could really make it real.
Yeah, because I think that performative piece is rooted in inner child work. It's still trying to get the approval from, our parents or whomever, coach or teacher, whoever it is in your life. I feel like it's very young. And so when that part comes up, it's a younger part that's still trying to get the attention, validation, approval, connection with authority figure or parent or whoever. So I think it's pretty deep and wide in nature. That's what you're saying. So it's 100%. Just little bits that we start chipping away at to start connecting to that part.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's my job to get you to that point and then go talk to someone. Like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not going to use therapy words. We're not going to use trauma words. We're not going to use childhood wounds. It's not my space. And it would be disingenuous for me too. It's my job to get you to a point where you're like, wow, why do I only connect with a love that I feel like I have to chase? Man, oof. And that comes from your journaling. And you're like, okay, well, it's probably from my childhood. It's probably from XYZ. It's probably from this connection to fight or flight. Like, why am I doing these things? All right, now let's get into it. I'm just very, very adamant, almost stubbornly so, about like not stepping into spaces that I don't belong, namely that. I think there's a lot of social media-ing around therapy language and narcissists and attachment styles and all these things, which I think it's great that we've found labels for these things. I'm sure you agree, but I think we need to use them in the right context, and I think we need to uncover them in the right context as well.
I agree completely. I think it was I was prepping for our talk, and you were talking about a lot of us will give to everybody else and try to get peace for everybody in our lives, maybe our significant others, our family, our coworkers, everybody else. You'll try to help them create peace, but we don't have peace within. Like, we're so busy hustling to caretake everybody or please everybody that leaves us at a place where we're not feeling at peace.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate reflection of how hypocritical we are sometimes, and in this weird way that we are empathetic towards everyone except ourselves. The opening chapter of That's Bold of You was around this thing that these researchers kind of wrote about called the beautiful mess effect, which basically showed that we love vulnerability in other people. We applaud it in other people. And they did all these kind of social science-y things to show that when it comes to unbiased observation and judgment of other people, we love it when they're vulnerable, when they're weird, when they're unique, when they do things like singing in front of a crowd, We love it. Anyone who would do that, that's amazing. But then when we apply the same lens, the same behaviors, the same things to ourselves, we assume that other people will hate it, will judge it, they'll think that we're cringe. We have this weird double standard in life. And I think it's just that. We have a double standard. I think the sooner we can realize that, the sooner perhaps we can just stop ourselves and say, it's great to give love, patience, second chances to other people. But what is up with the lack of reciprocity to myself? Why am I, for one, not doing these things? And then two, to your practice, why do I feel that I'm unworthy of giving these things to myself? Why am I chasing it in other people? It's an odd double standard. Probably comes from something in our adolescence or in our upbringing that made us think we're unworthy of it. Or perhaps it's we've put a lot of things on a pedestal that we put ourselves under it, and we just assume that we're second choice to these things. So I think a lot of mindfulness practice does come back to giving yourself the same things you give to other people. Seeing a relationship, for instance, the reciprocity in a relationship is paramount, of course, but what about reciprocity with yourself? Lots of meaty questions, certainly.
Yes. It's also interesting. People see other people being vulnerable now and then getting completely canceled or shut down, or like there's this fear of judgment and rejection and like, ooh, if I say the wrong thing, it's going to be bad. So I'm not going to go. I'm going to have this mask of just, I have it all together. I'm going to say the right things, but it's inauthentic. It's kind of killing us inside. I mean, literally, it's killing our bodies. What do you say to that?
I think it's valid. Of course, no one wants to be rejected. No one wants to be vulnerable and have it thrown back in your face. That could be debilitating. And if buried in the wrong way, it could become a lifelong lifestyle around that, which is very, very bad, of course. I think a lot about like, how can you amp yourself up to be vulnerable? It's vulnerable in the sense of, hey, I like you. Like, we should do this thing. Or vulnerable, hey, here's how I'm feeling, right? Communicating feelings. Like, we have the feeling. The vulnerability is the communicating of that or making choices around it. I think a lot about mindfulness, right? A lot of mindfulness, a lot of the time is like, it's sensitive. Like, let's be soft. Let's be patient. Yes, 100%. Sometimes, though, I think it's like, sometimes I call it in the masculine sense of like brute force mindfulness. Stand up and do the freaking thing because you feel the freaking thing. How do we get to a point where we actually are incentivized to take action and be vulnerable? It's the same answer I give when someone's like, well, I don't want to speak up in this relationship because what if I do and they think I'm too needy and they break up with me? It's the same answer every single time, which is give yourself a direction where that the incentive is that you have to speak up because either outcome, good or bad, serves you. And it's always the same, though. A little soundbite I always say is in any instance, and you speak up, you either get what you want or you get what you need. And both, every single time, they benefit you. On the get what you want front, of course, it's you vocalize how you feel, you show vulnerability, you speak your mind, you ask for clarity, and the partner or person is like, oh, yes, of course, we're on the same page, absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up. You got what you wanted. It's fantastic. On the get what you need side, though, it's no, this isn't right for me. Like, we should probably stop, or hey, sorry, this isn't going to work, whatever. Absolutely, it hurts and it stings, but it serves you because now you've found clarity and you're literally not wasting your time. Unfortunately, had to flip a switch to get that clarity from them. You found someone who maybe they think you are too much for them or too less for them. But again, why would you want to continue down that path if that's how they think and you needed this moment to find the clarity? So for me, like in instances where I'm like on the fence and I'm feeling self-conscious or I don't want to speak up, the mantra is always the same to me, which is get what you want or get what you need, get what you want or get what you need. Sitting in a space of gray, ambiguous waiting, in my mind, doesn't serve me. Certainly there's an element of patience and communication, but I think at the end of the day, it's always get what you want or get what you need. It serves you and it serves them, and it's always around the idea of clarity.
So that's what people want. They want clarity and then the confidence to pull the trigger on the clarity. People, to bring it back to words, often say, I don't have the words. I don't know what to say. This is a big gray area for people. They're like, I don't know what to say. So I do a lot of role playing, like just for them to gain access to the verbiage, or maybe they don't have a model or they haven't heard how to say something. So I find words can be really hard for people and language on how to say something. I mean, directly, clearly, and compassionately. I find that's really hard for folks. I mean, for you, It feels like words come pretty quickly and easily. Does that feel like that, or maybe not?
It does for me, but I would say that is evidence of practice. I mean, I've done 600 episodes where I write down such a detailed outline. It's basically prose at that point. So, I mean, practice certainly makes perfect. So how do you practice? Well, you practice with journaling. Like if you're feeling conflicted with a partner, for instance, write it down first. That's the way that you're not going to stumble over your words or get into a vulnerable conversation and not be able to find the path that you really want to express and then regret it. So practice. It's that simple.
It is, because I think fear is what holds people back from accessing the words. I'm afraid they're going to get mad at me. I'm afraid they're going to be hurt by what I say. I'm afraid they're going to dysregulate. I mean, I'm using a therapy word, but essentially that it's going to cause disconnection and discord. And so they don't want that. And so then they avoid it.
But again, that's coming back to the keeping the peace. That is therefore your motivation is to keep the peace with them. And when you're not trying to keep the peace with yourself, you're essentially disrespecting yourself. You're ignoring how you feel. And again, I totally understand that. What a human vulnerable feeling. But I also think about like ingredients for regret. And I think that's probably up there, top 3, certainly. To silence yourself because you don't want to dysregulate your partner, I think it's only setting yourself up for failure down the line. So I think a lot of like communication and these things, it requires some short-term thinking and vulnerability and within the scope of the long term about how if not voicing now, what will that mean for the long term? It's finding those 30 seconds of courage. But I think the more you journal, the more you go to therapy or whatever it may be, it's like it no longer becomes like a matter of courage. It just becomes a matter of aligning your actions with your feelings. And that's not like saying, oh, you're going to become this emotionally charged person in life where anytime you feel something, you just act on it. It just becomes your ability to see emotions, challenge them, understand them, and then decide which actions would align with them in honest ways.
I think your work is so important. This is what I'm seeing because I've got 2 teenage daughters and I kind of am immersed in the human development now. I mean, that's what I've done. I love human development. But when you see people, they don't know how to communicate with each other. They don't go directly to each other. They'll post something on their spam account, which is real cryptic. This is what the kids are doing instead of talking to each other. And so that's going to be taken into relationships. This pattern of, I don't go directly, I'm going to talk to, we've always done that. I mean, we look at history. We've kind of talked to our friends and we eventually learn, but now we have this device, and not to blame the device, it's just we're not teaching kids how to have meaningful, hard conversations. And you're posting words to give them the language, maybe to some extent. I mean, you're doing more like self-talk, but how do we teach people? How do we start integrating this more into our culture?
Well, I think that's the right word. Not to be culture is the problem or media sound like a boomer on my grandstand about that. No offense to boomers. But I think even like the idea of, for something like romance, soulmates, like we have this idea that someone will come along, or even like your best friend, they'll come along and they'll just get you. Like you won't have to explain yourself because you're soulmates, you're twin flames. And of course I love that. I love the vision. I don't understand why people think that communicating is unromantic, especially, and no offense to women, I hear it a lot of, well, I shouldn't have to tell him that because then if he does it, then it means he's doing it just to appease me. Well, what is wrong with that? What is wrong with that?
I've heard that so many times in therapy. I'm like, well, then we can't win here.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have.
Then why are you here? Because I'm going to coach. I'm a coach, so here I'm going to give you feedback, and you're going to go do it. Like you're going to go do the plays that I'm telling you. We can't win then. We're set up to fail.
I think a lot of it's ego. I think a lot of it is these examples that have been set for us where if we, have to do any of these things, that means it's not real or they should just know that. I mean, I think from a guy's perspective, like someone who's fully locked in with their partner and she comes along and says, hey, Case, it really makes me feel loved when you do this. Or by the way, when you say or do this thing, it makes me feel insecure. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Thank you for giving me the blueprint. I want nothing more than to make you happy. And here you've told me this thing that how was I supposed to know otherwise? Like you didn't give me any behavioral signs that something was up. So thank you. This is amazing. This is awesome. I don't know why we can't see it as such, as opposed to this like unromantic thing. And of course, then if you have to do it repeatedly and repeatedly, then we're in different territory. But like the idea of just expressing what makes you feel loved or what makes you feel like your friend actually has your back, like these things that for one, that's how communication works. And two, you think about like, how do you look at the health of a relationship? Call those things that I just described, just get a little bit of drama, call that like drama. You understand the health of a relationship through drama, through vulnerable conversations. Like I've done many episodes on how like at the beginning of a relationship isn't real because both people are on their best behavior. Everyone's holding back. Everyone's, just toe in the water. The real test comes when conflict, drama arises and how it's handled. Like you should crave that lens. You shouldn't try to introduce drama for that purpose, but you should crave the conversations, because that's how you get real insight into someone on both halves, like willingness to communicate and then willingness to receive. So I don't know. I just think we have it a little bit backwards. Perhaps it's culture, it's media, it's a little bit of ego. I think will always be a universal play there. Expectations, well, they should just know that. I don't think that's fair. I don't know what planet you're on, my friend, but everyone's living and loving and giving what they think, particularly in a relationship too. Like, people love how they want to be loved. People love how they used to love their ex in their past. They give what they have to give, and they're doing their best, right? It's your job to say, hey, like, you're doing these things and I appreciate it, but maybe they don't make me feel loved in the way that really does. And here's what, and let's have a conversation about it. Those are tough things, certainly, very, very tough to say, like, hey, like, for instance, you're trying to love me, but it's not making me feel loved. That's a doozy right there. But I think you could have those conversations in a way where it's not life or death, where it's not like sit down and shut up and here we go. I think there's a certain element of practicality to how to have these conversations and the language to use. But at the end of the day, it comes back to challenging the ego a little bit, stripping out a little bit of the expectation, and, just operating from that place of transparency.
I'm all about truth and transparency as the foremost of your life. And then when you have that and you feel more safe and secure within yourself, things start aligning. It's hard. There'll be hard moments, but you feel like you can handle it. And that's so true in relationships. 2 months into dating my husband, he's like, I think I love you. I'm like, how about premarital counseling? It's like, I'm not making this up. True story. And he's like, okay. He's like, I love you, so I want to be with you. I'm like, yeah, let's get it all on the table. Let's get our family stuff. Let's get our patterns. And he's like, okay. He was like a deer in headlights. Deer in headlights. We did it.
Right.
It was the best thing we ever did, because we learned how to communicate. We learned how to have hard conversations, and we got into the deeper stuff pretty quickly. It set the foundation. Do we still have stuff? Yeah, but we've learned the tools and the skills that have transcended time. So it's something we don't really talk about. We're going to go to premarital counseling. We only dated 2 months. Yeah. I don't want to waste my time. I was like, I don't really want a boyfriend right now. So
yeah.
He was like, okay, if I want to be with you, then I guess this is what I'll do. And he came into the first session. He's like, I had a perfect family. And I'm like, oh, here we go. Which she has a lovely family. They're amazing. And we all have stuff. So
yeah.
It was a journey. But anyways, the point is, I think having the courage to face yourself and then learn about yourself and face your fears. And of course, we're using the word traumas, all the things sets you free. And what you're doing is you're giving tools and access to how to get to that point. So what do you think are the most important things you've learned that you teach others to begin this journey?
Certainly. I think it's what I kind of riffed on in the beginning. It's prioritizing two things. It's not just one thing. It's not just listening to yourself. It's talking to yourself. Truly, it's practicing talking to yourself. And that could be cheesy. It could be affirmations. I used to laugh at like, I am lovable and worthy, and saying things into the mirror. I still funny, a little cringy to me, but it's so essential. Finding a way to listen to yourself, to practice mindfulness in that sense, but then turning around and finding words that actually align with it, I think is everything. It's so easy to get lost in your head. Think about anxieties and then overthinking and all these things. It comes from not being able to kind of press pause on that. And that's what writing does. So, the advice is that we've been circling here the whole time, which is finding a language that makes sense for you, that's truthful to you. I'm a big proponent of mantras and affirmations, like 12, 10, 9, 8, 5-word little phrases that you arm yourself with, that you could turn to in moments of vulnerability, get what you want or get what you need. In moments of turmoil, redirection is an upgrade. And whatever it is, just repeating quotes that I've written, just like little things that you can keep in your pocket that keep you calibrated or regulated in some sense, that just allow for you to pause rather than to devolve into overthinking or making impatient decisions. So I think language is how we communicate value in life. And if we haven't found language around our value, I think it's something that we need to do.
This is so perfect that language is that's the cornerstone of you, because you began with language. This is what resonates for you. This is like your soul. Language is your jam. And so, really, from what I've seen online and knowing your history now, I'm like, oh yeah, language is your middle name. Like, this is your calling. When you write these quotes, and then I know I'm almost out of time, but when you write these quotes, are they coming through journaling, Like when you write out what you're putting on Instagram, for example, when does that come through? Through your journaling, or does it just download, or how does it come through you?
I mean, it's basically journaling in that all my writing, I don't write without a prompt. Same way with journaling, I tend to give myself prompts. I tend not to do stream of consciousness. So like for quotes, I give myself a prompt. I say, love is, or life is better with someone who, or hang around people who, or growth is, or healing is. Like it could be literally 2 words, but that's how I riff. And then I come up with 50 examples and I go with it. A lot of my writing is very inspired by other people. Spend a lot of time online, read a lot of quotes, and someone will say, love is when 2 souls are intertwined. I'm like, okay, that's a good take. Let me take the first half of that, love is, and let me come up with my take. So a lot of it is finding what other people have said and saying, okay, that's really interesting. Let me form my own point of view. Let me take the first part of their sentence and let me fill it in with what I believe. So a lot of it is, all of it is prompt driven, a prompt that I came up with or that I'm borrowing, and then I'm filling it in with my life experience and my beliefs, whatever it is, and doing it many, many times. I mean, I've got Google Docs, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of those series that I've written, of which I only published like 8 or 9 quotes in the series, but I wrote 50 just to really flesh out the full idea, and then I choose a couple.
That's amazing. I heard Liz Gilbert say one of the prompts she says is, what do you want me to know today? And I love that prompt. I was like, I'm taking it. Thank you. It's just a great prompt. And so I told clients, what do you want me to know today? And just go with that. See what comes through. It might be something so random or something you just need to hear over and over and over and over. And that's usually the case.
I like that. It's got a little sense of urgency to it. Like, what do you want me to know today? Like right now, what do I need? Yeah, I like that.
I like that prompt. So I like prompts. Okay, so where can people find you if they want to see your Instagram, they want to get your book, they want to know more about you?
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Case.Kenny on Instagram. My podcast is called New Mindset Who Dis. That's everywhere. And then, you could Google my name, Case Kenny, or all my books are on Amazon, Case Kenny. I did write that book, That's Bold of You, recently. Bright yellow cover, pink text, basically about everything we're talking about here. Labels, reinventing yourself, giving yourself the same love, vulnerability, clarity that you give other people.
Are you on the Chinese social media since you can speak it and know it? I was just curious.
I'm a little rusty, if I'm honest. And now that I live in Miami, I'm switching to Spanish brain. So I need a way to get reinvigorated on the Chinese front. I was in China maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It's been a while, though.
I'd use a different part of your brain. I was just curious.
For sure. Yeah, Chinese is a very, very challenging language because it's tonal and characters. It requires a lot of different sides of the brain. But yeah,
they have lockdown, don't they, on their social media? I don't really know, but I was just curious. I know that was a random thought, but here we are.
Yeah, there's a lot of differences there, certainly.
Yes. Thank you so much for being on the Close the Chapter podcast. I loved our conversation. Everybody go out and get the book, and Cases, follow him on social and all the other places he is, and listen to his podcast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks, and have a great day.